Thanks, guys, for coming and sitting in. Please forgive me for sitting down to this workshop. I have a foot injury. Flared up last week, so it's really sore. So I'm spare myself and sit through the workshop if that's okay with you. Today we're going to be talking about the Elijah legacy, mentoring the next generation. And this is a topic that I just feel very passionate about and very strong about. We have a generation of young men out there that need the older guys in the church, reaching out to them, mentoring them, teaching them how to create a godly legacy and how to be godly men. So that's what we're going to talk about. I want to start off by showing you a commercial clip. I love this commercial. It's a clip of Cam Newton, the quarterback of the Carolina Panthers, who my Broncos humiliated a few weeks ago in the Super Bowl. It was a great day for me. But go ahead and roll that clip, Wayne. And we'll...
Hey, Cam, thanks a lot for coming to my school today.
No problem, Nate.
I promise to exercise and eat right.
Don't forget 60 minutes of play a day, right?
And I'll grow up to be big and strong like you.
Absolutely.
And play in the NFL.
Yes, sir.
And be drafted #1.
Maybe.
And become the starting quarterback of the Panthers.
Okay.
You can be my backup.
Excuse me?
And make Panthers fans forget about you.
What?
And become your mom's favorite player.
Whoa.
I'm just loosening my arm.
I love that commercial. I love it. Like,
hey, Cam,
be your
thanks a
mom's
lot
favorite player. And loosen, it makes me laugh every time I see it. What's so interesting about this commercial to me is Cam Newton's reaction. You have this little kid has #1 drafted starting quarterback, now NFL MVP, scared of this little tiny kid warming up his arm. He's going to come and take his place. And obviously Cam doesn't get the lesson that we're going to talk about today. And the lesson is this. This is the quote that the whole workshop's going to kind of be based around. Guys, if you didn't get any notes, there's some notes up front here. You can grab a copy. But the main session, what we're going to be talking about here is this quote. My generation's ceiling is the next generation's floor. Let me say that again. My generation's ceiling is the next generation's floor. I love this quote. In my opinion, that should be the definition of mentorship. Our heart's desire should be the next generation goes further for God and God's kingdom than we were ever able to reach. That they surpass us, that they reach more men, that they grow even greater legacies. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. You know, that's what a real man of God does. He hopes that the younger guys just not only just become the kind of man they are, but just surpass them. And when I think about that, the two men in the Bible that really stand out to me are Elijah and Elisha. And that's whose story we're going to look at today. Now, I don't understand, honestly, why when God decided to give Elijah a mentor and somebody to work with them, why he picked a guy named Elijah. Because it's hard on preachers to keep those two straight. I would have named him Bob. It'd be real easy to, Elijah and Bob is much easier than Elijah and Elijah. But God saw it differently, so I'll try my best. If I get them mixed up, please forgive me. It's a tongue twister. Okay, so basically you have two guys here. One is a younger guy starting out in life, starting out in ministry, and then you have Elijah, the older guy, the prophet, mentoring him, discipling him, and we're going to look at their story. Okay, so Elijah lived during a time in the Bible which was the time of the kings, and that was a time where one after another, one king after another, was just, they got authority in God's kingdom, but most of them just didn't follow God. And they'd fall away from God. And then God would raise up prophets like Elijah to try and get them back on track. And Elijah's #1, I guess you'd call nemesis, was King Ahab. Ahab was a man who had a great call in his life as a king. He was supposed to lead God's people, but he always just kept going back into sin. And he'd commit adultery. And he married Jezebel, who was the daughter, I think, of a priestess, and got into her false worship. And he kept leading Israel away from God. And God called Elijah to constantly speak into Ahab, stop what you're doing, get right with God, turn back to God. And these two battled back and forth for years and years. And eventually, it gets to the point where Elijah, he starts to get discouraged. He starts to believe, I'm the only guy left in this world serving God. And sometimes, it's easy for us to feel that way. We live in a culture that's very sensual, very worldly, full of compromise. And there's a lot of times as God's men, we kind of start to think, there's no other guys out there living for God. Why do I have to do it? And that's kind of the place that Elijah got to. And God spoke to him in that moment and said, you're not alone. I have thousands of men in Israel who are still following me and still serving me. And at that moment, he led Elijah to Bob, or Elijah. I'm going to call him Bob, if that's okay. He led him to him, and they kind of met, and it says, let's look at 1 Kings 19, verse 19. It says, "So Elijah went from there and found Elijah, son of some guy. He was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen, and he himself was driving the 12th pair. Elijah went up to him and threw his cloak around him. Elisha then left his oxen and ran after Elijah. 'Let me kiss my mom and dad goodbye, and I'll come with you.' 'Go back,' Elijah replied. 'What have I done to you?' So Elijah left him and went back. He took his yoke of oxen and he slaughtered them. He burned the plowing equipment to cook the meat and he gave it to the people, and they ate. And then he set out to follow Elijah and become his servant." Okay, so what we have here is when Elijah threw his cloak around Elijah, basically he was offering to mentor him. That was the biblical way of offering to mentor him. He was offering to become his spiritual father. And we see Elijah went back, and it says he burned his plow and he killed the cattle and everything. Basically, it meant he left his old way of life behind. That was his livelihood. It's what he did. He destroyed it all. The only path for him now was to follow Elijah and become the man God wanted him to be. And as you continue through the book of Kings, you read more about Elijah battling Ahab, battling Jezebel, but you don't read about Elijah anymore until 2 Kings. And that passage is where I want to focus the rest of this workshop on today. Basically, you find in 2 Kings 2 men at 2 different places in life. One's the younger guy just starting out. One's the older guy mentoring the younger guy and teaching him what he knows about God's kingdom. And for many of us, we fit into one of those 2 categories. You know, we have Josh over here. He'd be the younger guy, having an older guy mentor him. Got a lot of older guys mentoring younger guys. Some of us, my age, you know, we have guys older than us mentoring us. We're reaching out to younger guys who are kind of in both groups. But we all fit into at least one of these groups. And we're going to pick up the story where we see Elijah is traveling towards the Jordan River. God says to Elijah, "You've been a faithful servant. You've ministered well. I'm going to reward you. I'm going to take you to heaven, get you out of this horrible situation you're in. You know, your day of rewards come." So he starts traveling towards Jordan. But before he does, he turns to Elijah and he says to him, "You know, I don't want to make you come with. I'm going to leave you here." Maybe it was just too painful to say goodbye to the guy who would become his son. Maybe he thought it would be too discouraging for Elijah. The Bible doesn't say why he said this, you know, stay here, but he did. But Elijah, Bob, would have none of it. He kept saying, you know, "No, I'm coming with you. I'm going with you to the end." And so he did. They both set out towards the Jordan River. And throughout the trip, if you read in the Bible over and over, Elijah keeps saying, "Stay here, I'm going on ahead." And Elisha kept saying, "No, I'm going on with you." And let's pick up the story then in 2 Kings 2, verse 6. Okay, it says, "And Elijah replied, 'As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you.' So the 2 of them walked on. 50 men from the company of the prophets went and stood at a distance, facing the place where Elijah and Elisha had stopped at the Jordan. Elijah took his cloak, rolled it up, and struck the water with it. The water divided to the right and to the left, and the 2 of them crossed over on dry ground." Okay, that's very important. Remember that. He struck the water, and they both crossed over on dry ground. And when they had crossed, Elijah said to Elijah, "All right, tell me what I can do for you before I'm taken from you." So basically he's saying, you know, we're about to be separated. What can I do to help you once I'm not here for you any longer? And, you know, Elijah was a good friend. He went all the way to the end with him. And, you know, it was going to be hard to say goodbye. And basically we have two different men at 2 different places in life. One's about to exit this earth, leave earth. The other one's just starting out. And, you know, that's where we are in a lot of our lives. You know, basically the Elijahs are the younger men who are looking for men to model themselves after. You know, they're desperately seeking for a man to guide them, to be an example of them, of what it means to be a godly man and how they should live. And guys, our churches are packed with Elijahs. We live in a world where, unfortunately, a lot of boys are growing up in single mom homes. They don't have dads. Their dads left. Maybe some of their dads died. But they have these moms that are doing the very best they can to be mother and father. But it's just not possible for them to be a father because they're a mom. And these guys need the men in the church to step up and be their spiritual fathers and help these young men. And guys, we need to step up and mentor these guys, because if we don't, the cost it's too high. Right now, there's a huge epidemic that's sweeping through the church across America. Teens are growing up in church. They're on fire for God. They're loving God. They're serving God. They're coming to services. Youth groups are thriving. But then they age out of youth group, and these students, there's nowhere for them to go. Churches aren't having things in place to bring them to the next step, and they're leaving the church, and they're not coming back. There's a stat. I'm a big numbers guy. You can't argue with numbers. Numbers are true. They're absolute. And I have a stat that says 70 to 75% of teens drop out of church and never return when they're too old to go to youth group anymore. That is 7 out of every 10 students, when they age out of youth group, leave the church and never come back. 3 stay, 7 leave. And guys, that's on us. That we have to do a better job to make sure that doesn't keep happening. You know, these teens are not making a connection from the youth group to adult men's group. And honestly, a lot of churches, they have these thriving youth ministries, but they don't have something after that. If they do, it's usually, go to a singles group, which is basically christianmingle.com in your local church. And then they're supposed to go find a wife, get married, and then they can come to the men's group when they're married and have kids and, they're grown up. And that's the message we're telling the guys. Go get married, come back to us when you're married with kids, and then we can help you again. But they're leaving, and they're not coming back. There's another stat that says 29 years old is the average age that a man gets married in the United States today. 29. So if you think about it, they get moved out of the youth group when they're 18. They don't get married till they're 29. That's 11 years space in between that we need to be finding ways to meet these young men and bring them into our men's ministry. Because during those 11 years, they leave, and then they don't come back. And it's a huge problem that's just going throughout our churches. We're losing the next generation. We're getting the teens, but then we're not keeping them. We're losing them. They're falling away from God. And we need to be the ones that change the trend. It's on us. We have to accept this responsibility. We need to be the ones that, make the change here. We need to reach out to these younger men when they're in youth group, bring them into our churches, get them to come out, include them in our men's ministry, and we just need to make them a part of it. And, I know there's a movement, there's a lot of churches are trying to do this movement of, get married younger. They want guys to get married right out of high school, and that's like the perfect answer. And it is a good thing. I'm not saying men shouldn't do that if God's calling them. But I'm not one to live in the ideal and how we want things to be. I'm more of let's deal with the way things are. I mean, it's great if they want men to do that, but if men aren't doing it, let's deal with reality. Men are waiting until they're 29 to get married. We need to keep them involved during those years so they don't walk away from God. Recently, I attended a men's group and a men's conference, and one of the speakers there kind of made the point I'm talking about. When we do our men's group, we have to focus our minds on how we present the things to the men. And in this workshop this guy did, he made a statement, and this is what he said. He basically said, you're not a real man until you're married. Now, as a single guy who's doing ministry and I'm not married, but I have a very sarcastic nature, I didn't really let it bug me. I just kind of rolled it off and rolled my eyes and left it go. But, if you were a new Christian or an unsaved man, you came in there, basically you're saying there's nothing here for you until you get married. And how much better would it have been for him to say this? A boy becomes a man when he learns to love others around him, whether it be his wife, a girlfriend, if he's single, his family, and his church family. It's the same message, but it includes a single guy that, you become a man when you learn how to love people. That's what makes you a man. It takes the focus off of you're a man when you're married and makes it you're a man when you learn to treat people like Jesus treats people. And, we exclude men from our men's group when we make every discussion be about how to be a better husband and a better father. If you talk about that every week, the single guy's not going to be able to relate. They're not there. But if you make it be about relationships and how to have relationships, I have relationships. I'm a single guy. Me and my sister, we travel together. We live in the same house together. We're not married. She's my sister, but we have a relationship. I have a relationship with my dad. I have relationships with my mentors and people in our church family. And I need to learn as a single man how a godly man interacts in those relationships. We make it exclusive when every lesson in a men's group about sex and pornography is geared to how to resist having an affair and how to keep from cheating on your wife. Honestly, do you really think it's easier for a single guy to stay sexually pure than it is a married guy? Let me tell you, I'm single. It ain't any easier. You guys are married. I don't mean to be crude, but you have an outlet. When you're a single guy, you can't have sex. You have to stay pure before God, and you have to learn to overcome it and not follow through on any of your desires and stay pure before God. So it's something we all have in common. We should talk about how in the sex-driven culture all men struggle and ways that we can work to resist temptation. You see what I'm saying? Just make it a little bit more all-inclusive instead of just point-blank married children. You want everybody to be able to get something out of it. You want the younger guys coming. And honestly, younger men in your men's ministry, they're your renewable energy source. Right now we're in the middle of an election, and you're going to start hearing soon about energy and oil and renewable energy and all that stuff. Younger men are our renewable energy. We need the younger blood coming in and keep our men growing and thriving. We need to have new guys coming in so as the older ones go on to eternity, the men's ministry keeps growing with the younger men. So I guess basically the point I'm saying is men are leaving the church, and it's our job to keep them there and include them. And when we don't do that, basically what we're saying to them is, here's the door, come back when you're married with kids. Until then, you're not a real man, we don't have anything for you. And honestly, the men are leaving, and they're not coming back. We have to stop holding the door open for them. We have to include them in what God has going among his men. Okay, so how do we do it? All right, well, I'm going to give you a couple points here, and we can hopefully have a little time for discussion afterwards. But number one, we need to give them something to multiply. All right, we need to become men like Elijah, who mentor the next generation and help them become all that God called them to be. Elijah found a godly mentor, and when we last left them, they were standing there. Elijah's about to be taken to heaven, and he asked them, what's your last request? What can I do for you? And let's look at verse 9 and see how Elijah replied. Elijah said, tell me what can I do for you before I'm taken from you. Elijah said, let me inherit a double portion of your spirit. Okay, so Elijah was so impressed with Elijah and the life that he modeled that he wanted to become twice the man of God that Elijah was. And that was just like the ultimate sign of respect. Now think about it. How many times, I know I've been guilty of saying, I wish I could just be half the man as so-and-so. I wish I could just become half of what they are. But, I get what you're saying when people say that, but really we should be wanting to be double them, triple them. We should be wanting to surpass them. And as the older guys mentoring, we should want that. We shouldn't be hoping that, we shouldn't be holding on to our turf or trying to keep other people from taking our positions in the church or, holding on to what's ours. Instead, our goal should be to encourage the younger generation to outdo us, to outgrow us spiritually, to do the things for God that we've been unable to accomplish. And when they start to do it, we should be cheering them on. We should be encouraging them. We shouldn't be getting defensive and feeling like it's an attack on us when it happens. Elijah asked this of Elijah, and he said, you've asked a difficult thing, yet if you see me when I'm taken from you, it'll be yours. So he didn't get offended. He didn't think, who's this young twit to think he can do better than me? Instead, he said, watch me. Watch what I'm doing, and if you see it, you'll get it, and you'll get twice as much as I've had. Okay, now, there's one thing that I know. I'm horrible at math. I either need a calculator or I need to take off my shoes if I have to go over 10. I'm just not good at math. Anytime we were out for a restaurant last night, we had to figure out the tip, and I just kept saying, Dessa, what is it? I don't know what the number is. I'm just not good at math. But I do know this equation that's very true. If you multiply 2 times 0, you get 0. And it's time as God's men that we stop being zeros in God's kingdom. We need to give them something to multiply off of. We need to let the younger men see in our lives what it means to be a godly man. And in order for them to see it, it has to be there. We have to be spending time developing a relationship with God. We have to know God's ways and his will. We have to learn it so that they look at us and see, I like the way he lives. He's on fire for God, and I want to be twice as on fire as he is. So we have to give them something to multiply of. Last week we did a Mantour in Virginia, and Bobby Basham was the main speaker there, and he shared this quote by John Wesley. And it says this, what one generation tolerates, the next generation embraces. I love that. What one generation tolerates, the next generation embraces. You know, that's a powerful quote, and it's a stark warning of why we have to make sure that we're not giving in to compromise, not giving in to temptation, not just stretching the line as far as we can. Because what we're tolerating in our lives, things that we know we shouldn't really be doing, but we're doing anyways, the next generation is going to see us doing it, and they're going to think it's normal, and it's going to be okay, and it's going to become a way of life for them. We need to set the bar high, and we need to expect them to pass that bar. You know, God's men can't keep putting a low bar and saying, you know, just do the bare basics. We got to be setting the mark for these guys to shoot for. Okay, let's look at verse 11 here. As they were walking along and talking together, suddenly a chariot of fire and horses appeared and separated the two of them, and Elijah went up to heaven in a whirlwind. Elijah saw this and cried, my father, the chariots and horsemen of Israel. And Elijah saw him no more. And then he took hold of his garment and he tore it in two. Okay, then Elijah picked up Elijah's cloak that had fallen from him and went back and stood at the bank of the Jordan. He took the cloak that had fallen from Elijah and he struck the water with it. Remember we said that when they went across, he struck the water and it parted? Well, now the spirit of Elijah rested on Elijah and he struck the water with it. He said, where now is Lord, the God of Elijah? And when he struck the water, it divided to the right and the left, and he crossed over. The company of the prophets from Jericho who were standing by watching said, the spirit of Elijah is resting on Elijah. Okay, so Elisha, or Bob, watched Elijah, and he saw him go, and he got to receive the blessing he asked for. And everyone around him recognized it. And if you study the Bible, the really cool thing is if you study Elijah's life, there are 7 miracles that Elijah performed that are recorded in the books of the Bible. If you go and you look at Elisha's ministry, how many miracles do you think are recorded that he performed? 14. Exactly double the number of miracles that Elijah had performed. He met his bar, he met the generational ceiling that Elijah had, and he surpassed it. It became his floor, and he went above and beyond it, and he got the double portion. Guys, that's what we need to be shooting for. We need to be showing the next generation how to serve God, give them a mark to shoot for, and let them go above and beyond us. So we need to give them something to multiply off of. All right, number 2, we need to celebrate their success, not get intimidated or secure. Okay, so remember the motto. What is it? My generation's ceiling is the next generation's floor. That's right. And that's the goal. We need to give the younger guys something to follow, something to surpass, something to go above and beyond of. And then when they do it, we've got to celebrate with everything in us. How many have ever seen the show American Ninja Warrior? Love American Ninja Warrior. It's such a cool show. Somewhere in my deluded mind, I sit there and watch, and I think, I could do that. And Des is like, no, you can't. You'll hurt yourself. If you got too much going on, don't do it. But there's something in every one of us thinks, that's easy, I could do that. But, you know, it's a great show. They have that huge obstacle course. They go through all the different obstacles. And the big goal was to get to the end and climb the Mount Midoriyama. And finally, last year, somebody made it to the top, and they defeated the course. But one thing I love watching that show is that the camaraderie of all the different contestants. They don't fight with each other. They're not petty. The goal is they're competing against the obstacle course. They're not competing with each other. So if one doesn't make it, the other one's jumping in, they encourage them. If one makes it further, they're all there cheering them along. I remember last year, there's one group they call themselves the Wolf Pack, and all the older guys are going through the course, and it was a really brutal course. For some reason, some of the courses are harder than other ones, and this one was it was brutal. And one after another, these older veterans went through the course, and they failed, and they fell in the water, and they got out. But then there's this younger guy, and I think it was the first time he could compete. He hadn't been able to do it before up until that point, but he trained with the other guys, and he watched them, and he worked out with them. And this was his chance to finally get on the course and do it. And he went through obstacle after obstacle, and he conquered them. But what really spoke to me watching it was, as he went through each stage, all the older veterans walked along the course. They were encouraging, they were screaming out encouragement. They were yelling out tips, put your hand here, hold on to it there. You know, they were just as invested as him finishing the course as if they had done it themselves. They had all fallen in, they were all wet, but they wanted to see this younger guy beat the course and do what they had been able to do. You know, as I watched this, it just screamed inside of me, this is how it needs to be with God's men. We need to be coming along the younger generation and just encouraging them and cheering them on and saying, you can do it. You know, no matter what you're going through in life, no matter what you're facing, I've gone through this. This is how I did it. This is where I messed up. Don't do it this way. Or, you know, here's a way to help yourself to be able to conquer it. And we need to cheer for them and encourage them. And as they go through and as they surpass us, we need to be celebrating with us. The wolf pack stood there and they were jumping up and down. They were excited just as if they had finished it. That's what we need to be doing for the next generation. We need to be standing there and encouraging them and being there for them. That's what it means to have the next generation, our floor, be their ceiling. Okay, number 3, we must stop letting tradition outweigh relationships. Let me say that one again because it's not the most popular, but it's one of the most important. We have to stop letting tradition outweigh relationships. Okay, so what does this mean? Basically, it means that we need to forget this phrase. How many have ever heard this phrase? I'm sure we've all heard it in a church, but the phrase is this. This is how we always did it. Nothing kills growth in a church. Nothing turns off the younger generation. And when they come in fired up, excited for God, and they're put in their place and told, this is how we've always did it. We don't need your ways coming in here and making things different. That is a huge killer in our churches. I'm not against tradition. We all come from rich traditions. The tradition of the Pentecostal movement's rich. The traditions of our own churches. Every church has a story. Those are important. They're important to remember. We can never let the past dictate our future and keep the younger generation from coming in. I remember after my mom passed away, she had, about 5 years ago, she had a disease. It wasn't a disease, it was like a sickness that if she got around any kind of a smell, I mean any kind of a smell, it would close her lungs down and she couldn't breathe. We'd have to rush her to the emergency room. So her life was very limited, and during that time, my sister and I both lived at home with my mom. We took care of her. Basically, our lives revolved around taking care of her. We didn't get to go to church. We didn't go anywhere. And then she passed away, went to heaven, and we were able to start going to church again. The reason we could go to church is because my dad was a very abusive man. He was off Sundays. We couldn't leave him alone, but that's a whole other workshop. So, but when we first started attending this church, we walked in, and we went as new people in the church, never been before, went and just sat down. A couple of seconds later, this older gentleman and his wife walked up to us. They tapped me on the shoulder and said, excuse me, this is where I always sit. I always sit in this pew straight over from that window, and you're in my seat. Okay, now, like I said before, I don't get offended. I'm very sarcastic. I had a few comments after he left. But, we just kind of got up and we moved seats, gave him his precious seat. But say it hadn't been me, if it had been an unsaved person or a new believer had just come to that church, doesn't that just scream, welcome to our church, welcome to God's family, we love you? I mean, seriously, but he had his seat, it was his tradition. That's what I'm talking about. We can't be having that in our churches. Last year, my sister and I were invited to a friend's church for, I think it was Christmas Eve or Thanksgiving, I don't remember what it was, one of the holidays. Since just the two of us, it was just us, so somebody asked us over. And they also had some friends from their old church they used to go to for dinner. And when these people came in, quickly the conversation turned into one of those, this is what's wrong with our church. We've all heard them, right? We've all been, I hate those conversations, but anyways. And quickly it turned into this one woman just started in on the basic argument that not all, but a lot of older people have about church. What is it? Worship. And I could feel, as she started talking, I could feel Odessa's, my sister's eyes burning into me saying, shut up. Do not say a word. Keep your mouth shut. And it took every ounce of strength for me to keep my mouth quiet. I almost lost it when she said these words. She said, you could think they could sing more hymns like us older people like. After all, we're the one who pay the tithes. We should get our money's worth and sing more hymns. I almost fell off my seat, and I could feel Odessa's eyes glaring at me saying, shut up, be quiet. I had so many questions I want to ask her. I want to know, how many hymns how much of a tithe buys you a hymn? Does 10% buy you one hymn? Does 15% buy you two hymns? Well, with 20% tithe, can we ban the drums, just get them off the stage? If I tithe 30%, can I keep from having to listen to your grandchild sing during the offertory and spare my ears? If I tithe 40%, can we do Living on a Prayer by Bon Jovi for the offering? I mean, seriously, how much did you get out of this? And Odessa's just sitting there, shut up, be quiet. And I was like, I was good. I kept it to myself until I got in the car, then I told her all of them. But I managed to control myself. But the point is, sure, her focus was on her traditions. Shouldn't the proper attitude have been, I'm able to support the church. I'm already saved. I'm going to heaven. Why don't we do what's going to attract the next generation? Why don't we do what's going to bring them in? I'm already in God's kingdom. Let's do what we can do to attract them. Shouldn't that have been the concern, reaching out to others? We need to stop letting our traditions trump relationships. We're pushing the younger generation out the door when we're making it all about what we want and it's ignoring what they like, what their desires, what's going to attract them to God. Isaiah 43:19 says, "See, I'm doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it?" Jesus said in Matthew 15, "Why do you break the command of God for the sake of your tradition?" And I think it's time that we all ask ourselves that same question. Why do we sacrifice fulfilling the Great Commission for the sake of our tradition? It's a tough question, but it's a question we all need to ask. Okay, number 4. Don't put our interest above their interest. Philippians 2:3-4 says, "In humility value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each to the interests of others." Okay, so how do we apply that to mentoring the next generation? Well, basically, to explain it, let me tell you a story about a time God kind of smacked me upside the head to get my attention about this issue. I have a lot of Facebook friends who are youth pastors, and in the Pendle District, well, actually in all AG, they have what they call fine arts. It starts off as sectional, I think, then they go to district fine arts, and if you do good there, they send you to national fine arts. And it's just a great way to get the youth and the teens involved. I think it was 2 years ago, a youth pastor friend put up a video of a young guy in his church was doing an urban dance category. And I sat there and watched it. I honestly thought, my first thought was, are you kidding me? This is what they're encouraging guys in church to do? Urban dance, and that's not really a manly thing. Immediately, as soon as the thought entered my head, God convicted me. And he smacked me upside the head and he said, who are you to criticize how this young man chooses to worship me? Who are you to say his heart is not in the right place and what he's doing is wrong? He's doing it to worship me, to show his devotion to me. And who do you think you are and how do you think you're going to reach men if that's your attitude? And I was convicted, and it broke my heart, and I immediately repented of this horrible attitude. A couple weeks later, I was reading this book. It's called You Lost Me. Excellent book, has a lot of good information about how youth are leaving churches. I'll be honest with you, it is a hard book to read. It's written by somebody from the Barna Group, which does a lot of the polling and surveys, so it's full of statistics. You don't want to read it before bed. It's hard to get through, but it has a lot of really good information in it. But one point it made is that past generations of men have been very into sports and outdoors and hunting and fishing and football and things like that. The current generation is more prone to do arts. They're more into technology. They live in a technology era. Everything is cell phones and videos and video games. Guys are more likely to do fantasy football or play Madden leagues than they are to go and play football on their high school team nowadays. Guys are more likely to do the urban dance or a human video or something like that than they are to join your church's softball team. Part of the reason is because there's a lot of single moms raising the guys. They don't have a dad in their life. A part of it is just the culture we live in, where they learn at a young age how to do all this video stuff that we kind of look at and are like, how in the world? But, our job is to not make them into what we want them to be. Our job is to accept them as they are. If God calls you to mentor a guy who's an athlete, it's great. You go to his sports games, you cheer him on, you're there for him. If God calls you to mentor a guy who's into the theater, you go to his plays, you go to his productions, you cheer him on, you're there for them. If God calls you to go to like an artist or somebody who likes to paint, you go to his galleries and his displays and you cheer him on, and you, same as if it's a football player or something like that. You know, you might say, but Jamie, I don't like that kind of stuff. You know what? Tough. God don't care if you like it or not. The kid likes it. God's heart is to reach that younger teen. Your heart is to adapt what you like to what they like and be there for them and reach them where they are. You know, our job is to fulfill the Great Commission. Paul says, I have become all things to all people so that by all possible means I might save some. I can do all this for the sake of the gospel, that I might share in its blessings. So basically, we need to become a fan of things they like. We need to do the things they do. I was working with a younger guy once, and he was always on me to watch this movie. It was Nacho Libre. He's like, you got to watch it. It's the best movie. It's so funny. And it's not really my speed. I'm more of the Rocky. I can practically recite every Rocky movie. I'm the John Wayne. You saw in the video up there, that's my jam, the Marvel movies, stuff like that. But he really wanted me to see this, so I watched it. And we watched it together, and we were joking around about it. And anytime I saw him, he'd quote lines from the movie. Just by me watching this honestly stupid movie with him, it made a connection with him that he saw that I cared enough about him to watch something I didn't want to watch. And, you know, that's kind of what we're talking about today. It's not about us. It's what's going to do the best to reach the next generation. We need to include these guys in our men's ministry. We need to give them something to multiply off of. We need to become, while we become 4 to our predecessors 2, they need to become 8 to our 4s. See what I mean? You know, we need to be, you know, developing relationships with them, cheering them on to surpass us in God's kingdom. We need to sacrifice tradition to build relationships with them, and we have to put our interests above their own interests. Guys, we are all in this together. We just are. We all work together to become godly men, and we need to be doing with the younger men as well. The kingdom of God grows stronger. The enemy's worst fears come true when he sees godly men becoming strong men of God. That's what the enemy fears more than anything in the world, is an army of men rising up and saying, enough's enough, I'm living God's way, I'm serving God. And that's what we need to do, not only in our own lives, but for the next generation. We need to pursue the double portion. We need to embrace membership. And guys, the only way we can do it is to just, you know, as Nike says, just do it. We need to jump in, find younger guys. A lot of these guys, honestly, they've had their dads have abandoned them. They're not going to reach out to you. They have walls up against men. It's your job to reach out to them and start breaking down those walls. That's why you have to meet them where they are, so they start to break down the walls and get them to open up to you. And once you meet them there and they start opening up, that's when you start pouring yourself and God into their lives. We'll get out a few minutes early and go beat everybody else for the remaining donuts out there. Thank you guys so much for coming out. Let's just close in prayer real quick. Father, thank you for every man in this room.